that almost every reference to Make My Day is in the context of Colorado. And in my extensive research and career in use of force law, the only proper application of the term Make My Day I've ever seen is in reference to Colorado. It was a derogatory label put on a statute, a home defense, a defense of highly defensible statute that Colorado passed, I think in 1985, if I recall correctly. They called it, and they decided to call it the Make My Day law. At the time, Clint Eastwood, Dirty Harry movies were on the screens, popular, and there was one of those movies where Dirty Harry used as a catchphrase while pointing a gun at bad guys, "Go ahead, make my day. Give me an excuse to shoot you." It really has nothing to do with this Colorado statute. In fact, I should pull up the statute, shouldn't I? So I can show it. Because the statute does something very specific. Very specific. It literally changes the definition of self-defense in the context of defending your home from an intruder who appears likely to commit another crime in the home in addition to the intrusion. I'm just going to pull this one up on the Law of Self-Defense website. Statute, if I recall correctly, 704.5. Yes. Here it is. Whoops. That's not the right one. Hold on a second. I have it here. All right. So what does this statute do? So one thing I'm going to point out is that this is a very unusual statute. To my knowledge, Colorado is the only state in the country that has a statute that does this particular thing. One of the elements of self-defense is the element of proportionality, that you are not privileged to use deadly force in self-defense unless you're facing a deadly force threat. There are a few other kind of edge cases where you're also allowed to use deadly force. But for our purposes discussion here, you can only use deadly defensive force if you're facing a deadly force threat. Now, there are many states that in the context of defending your home from an intruder will create a legal presumption that the intruder is reasonably perceived by you as a deadly force threat. So they're creating a legal presumption that that element of proportionality is satisfied. They are presumed, the intruder is presumed to be presenting a deadly force threat, which is what you need to be justified in using deadly defensive force. That presumption, however, is rebuttable. It could, in theory, be overcome by a prosecutor. Colorado went a step further, and they didn't merely presume that the other party was presenting a deadly force threat, that the intruder was presenting a deadly force threat. Colorado decided it's not required that the intruder be presenting a deadly force threat. If that intruder presents any degree of threat, however slight, you're privileged to use deadly defensive force against them. So it effectively does away with the element of proportionality. It doesn't merely presume the element's been satisfied, keep it, but presume it's been satisfied. It does away with proportionality entirely if you meet the conditions of the statute. And let's take a look at what those conditions are right here. Any occupant of a dwelling, meaning it doesn't necessarily have to be your dwelling. You could be visiting someone else's home, right? You're an occupant of that dwelling. You're not a resident, but you're an occupant while you're in the home, is justified in using any degree of physical force, including deadly physical force, against another when that other has made an unlawful entry into the dwelling. That's one condition. When the occupant has a reasonable belief that the other person has committed a crime in the dwelling in addition to the uninvited entry, that's a second condition, or is committing or intends to commit, now you're mind reading, a crime against a person or property in addition to the unlawful entry, so an alternative condition. And when the occupant reasonably believes that the other person might use any physical force, no matter how slight, against any occupant. That's what Make My Day does. It removes the element of proportionality as a requirement for deadly defensive force in the context of a home intrusion if these elements are met. No other state does this. Only Colorado does this. So to my mind, when the moniker was originally applied to Colorado's unique statute, and no other state has adopted a similar statute, no other state just outright eliminates proportionality as a required element in defense of a dwelling, it's inappropriate to use that moniker as a label on other states' laws that are conceptually different from what Colorado did. So another point of what I would argue is appropriate clarity there. But in any case, we can see that Make My Day and Castle Doctrine are completely different things. Castle Doctrine relieves you of an otherwise existing duty to retreat. Retreat is the element of avoidance, a distinct element from proportionality. It relieves you of the element of avoidance when you're defending in your home. Make My Day relieves you of the element of proportionality when you're defending in your home in Colorado. So two very different things, not the same legal concepts. Then he references some other cases here. We've previously discussed Castle Doctrine laws or Make My Day laws, not the same things, including other cases involving garage shootings or shooting off the property of the homeowner. Okay, if you're off the property of the homeowner, neither Castle Doctrine nor Make My Day would apply. Both Castle Doctrine and Make My Day involve you in your home, defending against an intruder. If you're off your property, you're just in public. You're not in your home. You're not in your castle. Involving garage shootings, I don't want to click open every one of these cases because we'll be here all day, but garage shootings can make a difference depending on whether or not the garage is attached to your home or detached from the home. If your garage is attached to your home, it's simply part of your home. It's part of your castle. But if it's detached from your home, it's often argued it's not part of your castle anymore. So to make it part of your castle, you'd have to argue, for example, that it was part of the curtilage. And that's a credible argument. You may be able to make that argument. I can tell you that in Colorado, the courts have found that for Make My Day law purposes, doing away with that requirement for proportionality, a detached garage does not qualify as a dwelling for Make My Day purposes. An attached garage does. So the context of the garage can make a big difference. So the garage case involves somebody in Montana. I don't know enough about this case. Let's see. A prosecutor declared that the shooting cannot be prosecuted given the state's Castle Doctrine or Make My Day law. Again, we're conflating Castle Doctrine or Make My Day. And to be clear, all Castle Doctrine does is relieve you of an otherwise existing duty to retreat. You still have to meet the other elements. By the way, you can get this cheat sheet, the 5 elements of self-defense, for free, folks. We give it away. Get it at lawofselfdefense.com/elements. If you don't understand these elements of use of force law, you can't possibly understand self-defense or defense of other people. You can't. These are the building blocks. They apply in all 50 states. Not all 50 states require all of the 5 elements, but these are the maximum number. Some of these elements can be waived, like under Castle Doctrine. If you're defending in your home, avoidance is waived. The legal duty to retreat is waived. But if avoidance is waived, the other 4 elements are still required. Innocence, imminence, proportionality, and reasonableness are still required, meaning even if someone's in your castle, before you can be justified in shooting them, you have to have a reasonable belief that they're presenting as an imminent deadly force threat to you. If any of that's not true, you can't shoot them in lawful self-defense. So Castle Doctrine is not a blanket license to shoot anyone you find in your home. You still have to meet those other conditions of self-defense. Let's see. So it may well have been that the prosecutor in that Montana case being referenced here decided not to prosecute because the actual required elements, but for avoidance, waived under the Castle Doctrine, the other required elements were robust for the defense and not subject to disproof beyond a reasonable doubt. That would be a perfectly appropriate reason not to criminally charge in that case.